Hello, welcome back to the Apatros review. In this episode, Coronaween Part 2. And the film featured in this episode is I Spit on Your Grave 3 Vengeance is Mine, available on DVD from Defiant Screen Entertainment in Region 4. Hi there, welcome back to the Apatros review. I'm your host, Mila Sipka, and joining me is taking a ride through the wild world of science fiction action horror, all from my personal DVD collection, and a few Blu-rays, videotapes, video games, and TV shows. Now in this episode, this is the second part of the 4-episode Coronaween that I'm doing. This is basically to mark the Halloween of the year 2020, which is basically the year of the coronavirus. I know you guys probably won't be celebrating Halloween much because of the social distancing, the low candy yields, all the sanitation stuff done, like crowds and stuff. So just sit back and relax, and I'll take you on a trip through the horror genre. Well, with 4 different types of films in the horror genre. Now, in the last episode, I did The Temptation, which was a 2009 lesbian vampire film, which was a British film. It was actually pretty much a chasp rerun of something like Lesbian Vampire Killers. And yeah, it was actually a pretty average film. Now, in this episode, we look at the film I Spit on Your Grave 3, Vengeance is Mine. Now, this was actually the IMDb has recently, ignore that, recently changed the title to I Spit on Your Grave without the 3. Now, this is actually the second sequel to the 2010 remake of I Spit on Your Grave, which in turn was a remake of the Day of the Woman, the infamous 1978 cult classic. I'll review that film in the future, hopefully. And again, this is the cover for the Australian disc from Defiant Screen Entertainment, basically handling Anchor Bay's catalogue. It is an Anchor Bay film, but just for some reason they pretty much ditched their Australian operations or something. Now, the film was directed by R.D. Bronstein, so the director of the first 2 films, Stephen R. Monroe, pretty much left the project. And given the fact that the first 2 films did not make any money, well, very little, hardly anything for their budget, in fact, the box office takings for I Spit on Your Grave 2 was just downright pathetic. I mean, some people in Russia liked it, but it was just, And this film came out in 2015. Now, as I've already made clear, while I believe that the original 1978 rape revenge thriller Day of the Woman was an important film, despite the crudeness of the technical side of things, I did not believe it was necessary to remake it, which is what Stephen R. Monroe and Miyazaki did in 2010, a remake that failed to quite make back its $2 million budget, technically making it a flop. It made like $1.5 million total, and the atrociously nasty 2013 sequel was pointless, and that would have had a really pathetic box office haul. I think like $500,000 something. Now, but after learning that the 3rd film was made, I wondered if Zaki's original intentions for his franchise was changed from some sort of twisted altruistic motive to simply inflicting cinematic sexual assault onto his audiences, purely to drag the horror genre down by giving the high-handed moralists plenty of ammunition to attack the genre with. Now, we've already had the infamous video nasties debate in the early 1980s, which destroyed any sort of peace between conservatives in the horror film industry, thanks to the ill intentions of the moralists, and the first 2 post-millennial I Spit on Your Grave films are practically inviting that nasty war to restart all over again. Now, thankfully the war didn't happen, but that doesn't mean that the franchise didn't cause problems with many critics. Anyway, I went into this film with very low expectations, only to be surprised in a good way. This prequel to Caulford's installment is not only the best film out of the post-millennial franchise, but also the only one that is in any way watchable by anyone outside that certain hardcore type of horror aficionados who enjoy torture horror films. Now for the story. 5 years after her experiences of being raped and getting a bloody revenge against the lowlights who attacked her, Jennifer Hills is now working a low-level shitty admin job, constantly having flash fantasies of attacking any man who dares cross her path. And she's basically given up being a novelist. She makes the decision to join a support therapy group of victims of sexually based crimes, and instantly makes friends with Marla Finch, a hardcore feminist who hates all men and who also wishes to get her revenge on the lowlights in the city. The 2 new besties track down a child molester and threaten him, but when Marla is beaten to death by her ex-boyfriend, and the ineffectual police can't do anything, Jennifer makes a fateful decision to return to her prior habit of inflicting retribution, and becomes a vigilante. I'm not talking about Charles Bronson vigilante, just a whole different kind of vigilante, tracking down rapists and molesters and subjugating them to hideous deaths, while making friends with the grief-stricken father of a rape victim who gives her added incentive to become an avenger for those who can't get it anywhere else. Now, while the first two post-millennial I Spit on Your Grave films were slickly made, but otherwise morally repugnant exercise in sadism that followed a line of morality that doesn't click in with reality, Vengeance is Mine actually takes the time to elaborate on the premise in ways that don't involve featuring protracted, you know what I mean, those kind of things being depicted on screen, and also shows how the fractured psyche of rape survivor might not be in the best mental shape to comprehend how their experience requires them to go through extensive therapy to prevent their lives from getting worse, thanks to things like survivor's guilt or feeling helpless if the abuser doesn't get punished for their crimes. Having personally seen firsthand the effects of abuse, I sympathize with both Jennifer Hills and Oscar Koza, the father of the dead victim, and know how their pain feels, even for the abuse I've seen wasn't the type that they've experienced. When somebody goes through something like that, it destroys their personality and causes them to go into dark mental places that festers on their soul and perpetuates their abuse in a psychological fashion. While I don't condone things like biting the dick off a local rapist, slicing it too, or shoving the metal pipe up Melissa's ass, at least not outside the sanction of a court of law, the retribution that Hills delivers to her victims does have some resonance in the minds of those who have seen human evil up close and personal, and constantly have flash fantasies of inflicting such retribution to these lowlifes personally, and without featuring any scenes of assault or blunt message. This is essentially similar in concept to the Death Wish franchise, where Charles Bronson massacred waves of muggers, rapists, and drug dealers with an awesome arsenal of weapons in the name of justice. In fact, in the climax of Death Wish 4, Charles Bronson basically blows somebody up with a grenade launcher. Now, of course, the film does feature legal ramifications of such behavior, as the final scene shows Hills being counseling during the 2-year prison sentence she received for attacking a local hood, and the exit from the therapist's office still severely mentally disturbed by experiences. In essence, a much better film than the previous two. And now, while the psychology isn't perfect, but perfectly explained, but it does make you think, and it's a lot more substantial than the first two films. That being said, it's nowhere near good enough to be anything more than strictly passable. So with that in mind, I give I Spit on Your Grave 3 Vengeance in Mine a C+, a 5 out of 10. Now for the gore. One lowlife gets his dick sliced in half and tip bitten off, while the molester gets his ass violated by a metal pipe. The third scuzzball is shot by police when Hills fails to get the upper hand, and some brief but graphic flash fantasies read the ugly heads every now and then. I say ugly since they lack the right context to have any positive impact. Now, there are brief flashbacks to Hill's assault in the original film, by that I mean the 2010 remake, where a boozer button very briefly seen, but this is not the kind of franchise where you ogle nudity. Now for the DVD. The DVD was released in Region 4 by Defiant Screen Entertainment. So far, this is the only title from this label I have in my collection, so you won't be seeing Defiant making repeat appearances on this site, which has a decent picture of good sound quality, even though the color palette is only slightly more vibrant than the previous two films. It still looks oppressively desaturated, while the subtitles come in both English and Spanish. Interesting. Pretty much English and Spanish, but on their own, is something that many American DVDs tend to do, usually in yellow font. This one's in white. Now, there are no supplemental features on this disc, although a preview trailer plays upon boot up. So again, to reiterate, that film gets a C+, 5 out of 10. It's passable. I mean, it's the best film of the post-millennial works, and light years ahead of Miyazaki actually returned to make his own sequel to the original film, Day of the Woman Deja Vu, which is considered to be just plain horrific. I mean, it's got like 10 minutes of somebody raking a yard. I mean, Miyazaki's not a good filmmaker at all. I mean, pretty much had a fluke with the original Day of the Woman. Okay, well, that's it for that review. Now this is part 2 of Coronaween, and you're going to see Coronaween's part 3 and 4 coming shortly. So keep watching and see you around.